Hi students, welcome to Year 9 Science and Unit 2, Our Amazing Earth. In this particular video, we're just going to have a little bit look in a little more detail at the supercontinents and their breaking apart. So what we need to do is to explain the idea of both Pangaea and Gondwana, as it's most relevant to us in the Southern Hemisphere, and how the continents have reached their current positions. So, in order for us to do this, we need to firstly look at Pangaea. Now, Pangaea is the supercontinent. It's all of the continents put together, and the idea was first proposed, as we've looked at in previous videos, by Alfred Wegener. And this occurred in the early 20th century. He sort of extrapolated backwards, if you like, in time to try and put all of the continents back together like a jigsaw puzzle to fit all of the different pieces of the different continents together. Obviously, that meant that some of them were in quite different positions to where they are now, and it meant that we needed to try and use our developing understanding of continental drift, of seafloor spreading, and of plate tectonics to try and understand exactly what was going on with these supercontinents. What we did learn was that when you looked at each of these, you found that the supercontinent of Pangaea pretty much split into two regions separated by the Tethys Sea, and they were the northern supercontinent of Laurasia, which included Europe and Asia and North America, and the southern continent of Gondwana. And that includes South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia, as well as India, which was one of the interesting ones that's there, and also the Arabian Plate was also part of that southern continent. So you can see here a range of different continental masses that have together been moving relative to one another over time. Now, some of the movements have kept them relatively close to one another. Others have moved them a long way apart. We've looked in previous videos at the relatively fast motion of something like India in comparison to the other continents that sit around it as part of both Pangaea and also Gondwana. So what we need to do is to try and focus in on the regions that we're most interested in for our study and see what's actually happened to that particular continent over time. So you can sort of get a little bit of a sense of what's happening as these continents start to break up. So this gives us a bit of a timeline on what's happening. So around about 200 million years ago is when we still had this supercontinent of Pangaea, which is stretching from pole to pole, from the north through to the south. 180 million years ago is when we can start to roughly see this separation that we talked about before, the Eurasian plate, the North American plate or continent, and then you can see all of these: South America, Africa, Arabia, as well as Antarctica, India, Australia, and so on. And they were all part of these sort of starting to separate masses of great supercontinents of land that were just starting to move apart from one another. You can see, as we continue to kind of wind forward in time, that as we have another 100-odd million years passing, now the continents are actually starting to separate out from one another. And this has very important consequences, or had very important consequences, for the different organisms that were living on these different continents at different times. Because once they started to move apart, land organisms in particular not able to move as easily between the continents, and therefore these separations by sea did limit any further migration. And so that tells us a little bit around the time frames. Certainly that we've used them to identify parts of the supercontinents that were once joined, but we can also identify where opportunities, for example, for evolution in isolation to occur have also happened after these breakdown events have occurred. The interesting one, of course, is India. You can see now has moved a long way away from its Gondwanan location, and it is heading rapidly north towards the Eurasian plate. In the present time, we can see this rejoining, or at least this much closer link between South America and North America. We can see that there's been a slight separation now between the African and Arabian plates, and we've talked in a previous video just about how that sort of separation has occurred and is occurring to now. And you can also see India has been lost within the Asian land mass. So this is kind of, it's probably not important for you to track any individual continent all the way through its Pangaean origins to its present position, but certainly the one that we're most interested in is what's happened with Australia. The most unusual and beautiful thing about Australia is its unique flora and fauna, particularly the animals that are so quintessentially Australian. And part of the reason for that was Australia's isolation from the rest of the world for such long periods of time did not give other animals much of an opportunity to compete with the fauna that was developing and evolving in Australia. And so as a result of that, not just the diversity of life that we see in Australia today, but certainly some incredible organisms that lived in the recent past and that are part of Australia's megafauna. So this gives you just a little bit of an overview of how Pangaea broke up to form those two supercontinents of Laurasia and Gondwana, and then further broke up as each of those continents moved relative to one another into the positions that we find them today. So this is an interesting exercise for science to look at what we have today. Obviously, we can't see what's happened in the past, but we can infer what's happened from the evidence that we find around us. To pull in a little bit closer just on our own plate, which is the Gondwanan plate, and you can see this is well before all of the separation started to occur. And you can see that this is just a little bit more specific geology around our particular region. In fact, Australia itself was not one complete continent. We can actually identify different cratons, different regions within our country. So there's a lot of aspects to the geology of Gondwana and to the geology of Pangaea, and each of these is providing us with just a little piece of evidence to help us build this picture of what the continents used to be like many millions of years ago. And hopefully that just gives you a little bit of an overview about this whole idea of supercontinents, continental drift, and the driving force of plate tectonics that's enabled that to occur. Thanks for watching.